The way we're going to pay for those is by cutting corporate welfare.
We will cut corporate welfare, all the corporate welfare, $5 billion that we can save there.
You criticize Mr. Harper and conservatives on giving billions to billionaires and corporations, but you gave $14 billion more. I believe firmly in making sure we tackle the powerful corporations that are influencing government.
You don't want any subsidies to the oil and gas
No,
industry,
I don't.
and I don't believe in corporate subsidies also in corporate welfare, so we can agree on that.
Corporate Canada, as you heard there, was a factor in last night's leaders' debates. Most of the party leaders are promising to slash the government's corporate subsidies. So, with this campaign so focused on affordability for Canadians, does the business community feel left out? Nicole Verkindt is founder and CEO of OMX and a former Dragon on CBC's Next Gen Dragon's Den. I caught up with her a few days ago from Toronto. Hi, Ms. Verkindt. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time.
Hi, Vashi.
I really wanted to have this conversation because something has struck me in this campaign around the rhetoric where corporations are concerned. I find it's right across party lines. You hear a lot about getting rid of corporate welfare, or corporate handouts, corporate subsidies, or the idea of accusations flowing back and forth around different parties being quote unquote too cozy with corporations. I'm wondering what you think of the rhetoric so far.
Yeah, I mean, as a small business owner, and I'm involved in the BCC with their task force on how to grow the economy, I just think that it's almost getting petty. We need to be having a conversation about how to grow the entire pie. We need to understand where this funding actually comes from to fund more hospitals, more schools, more of these social programs. So I sort of feel like we're going into this place where it's all about clickbait. It's all about attacking the leaders themselves, attacking their character. We want to talk about Andrew Scheer's citizenship, or that Justin Trudeau liked to dress up when he was younger. We're not talking about, we're almost talking down to the electorate about how to actually grow the entire economy so the whole country prospers.
What do you think, and I'm wondering if you sort of, at least, and I want to ask in a second about what you're hoping to hear about more, especially where corporations and business and the economy is concerned, but what do you think is behind the rhetoric where corporations are concerned? I mean, my guess is things like Bombardier and SNC have struck a chord with Canadians, and there is a certain level of resentment there that politicians are trying to tap onto. But what is your sense?
Well, I'm not a political operative, but I assume the reason that we're going here is because they have found that it works, that it's easier and faster, and that the electorate today is inundated with so much stuff online. Our attention spans are really short. And I just think that today it is working. We're having bigger divides. We're getting people angrier, and we tend to be talking more about social related things as opposed to, and I don't even think it's a conservative liberal thing. I think it's a sign of the times. I mean, when Paul Martin was elected, it was all about balancing the budget. It was all about in previous governments, but free trade. How do we grow the entire economy so that everybody benefits? I just think it's a sign of the times, and the reason why has to be because it's working.
So what kind of policies or directives are you hoping that you hear, or that you had been hoping you would be hearing about in this campaign?
Well, here's the thing that we're finding is that so many of the fundamentals of our economy that are essentially indicators of what's going to happen 5-10 years from now are moving in the wrong direction. So Canada's 34th out of 35 on the countries in terms of regulatory burden. So unfortunately, it's not sexy for somebody to go home Thanksgiving weekend and say, hey guys, I really wish we were talking about reducing the regulatory burden so we could get, more foreign direct investment in this country. So unfortunately, it's not a topic that, grabs people's attention, and maybe it's not that interesting for everybody. It's interesting for me, but what we should be talking about are what some of the fundamentals are that are wrong with our economy and our business environment that will essentially translate years from now. And the words that we should be using, I've always used the word competitiveness, but I don't think it works that well, but prosperity would work. So I think we should be talking about how if we made certain changes to certain things, like reducing regulatory burden, for instance, that we would create more prosperity in the long run, which would, of course, translate into more money for all of these things that we all want.
It's interesting that you bring up the word competitiveness, because I've read some analysis on it during this campaign as well. And every time we interview the Business Council of Canada, for example, it's one of the main things that they're hoping to hear about. But that word apparently is not, quote unquote, sexy or whatever you want to call it in this campaign.
Yeah.
When you say, what is the competitiveness issue in this country from your perspective?
Oh, it's so many things. I mean, we're not exporting. We've signed all these free trade agreements, and Europe is selling more to us, but we're not selling more back, for instance. So it's just our tax environment is complex and it's not competitive with other countries. I touched on the regulatory burden. I mean, some of these stats are they're funny, but of course they're not funny. Just the amount of time it takes to get a basic building permit in Canada, you could fly to Mars and back in the time that you're getting a warehouse extension. You've seen what's happened with our pipelines and with our complex infrastructure projects. Like, just look at the infrastructure bank. Years have gone by. It's a great initiative. What has really come about? So there's just all these fundamentals that are needed up front to get business moving. But overall, I think it's really the confidence. We're seeing a lot less foreign money coming into Canada wanting to start new energy projects or new major infrastructure projects because the confidence isn't there. Canada's too complicated. Canada, delays everything. So that to me is a bad sign. And even though our economy is doing well, there's the job rates are good, but those fundamental indicators are worrying me. And I thought about it. There's over 1 million small businesses in Canada. So there's over 1 million people running small businesses. We don't need to talk down to these people. They know what it means to grow your top line, to grow your revenue, to increase overall prosperity. So you have more to work with. I don't think we need to talk down to our electorate.
Do you think it's the small businesses though? Because I would almost denote, and feel free to disagree, that at least within the political rhetoric there is a sort of separation between the way in which they address small business and the way in which they address the corporate world. And I'm guessing that plays on certain indicators as well, that we're seeing growth, for example, in the economy overall, but wage growth has been slow comparatively, and that there is a feeling, and I'm not saying it's 100% accurate at all, but that this idea of big corporate Canada living in a different world than the rest of Canadians.
You're right with that, but when we start talking about those fundamentals, the complexity of the tax system, all these different things, it's the exact same thing for small business owners as corporations fundamentally. Minimum wage, our cost inputs, the regulatory burden. Don't forget that for every pipeline that doesn't get approved or every complex project, there's hundreds and thousands of suppliers in that supply chain that are impacted. So those are mostly a lot of small businesses. So you're right. I just think if we bring it back down to the absolute fundamentals, my example of moving in the wrong direction on regulatory burden, that affects every single business. And I think the average person who goes out to vote at the end of the month, they're not going to be saying, well, I really want to vote for that party that's going to reduce my regulatory burden and help with businesses. It just doesn't seem to be an emotional topic. But unfortunately, in the long run, it's going to have a huge impact for everybody.
For sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks to
Thanks
Nicole
for having me.
Verkindt, founder and CEO of OMX.